So I think we can go to our next talk with Anne Foullioux and Peter Steinbach. So Anne is working in the Department of Geoscience at the University of Oslo as a research software engineer. She supports researchers towards the adoption of open science best practices since 2015 and has been very active with the Carpentries, a diverse and global community of volunteers. And she teaches foundational coding and data science skills to students and young researchers, and currently works on Nordic e-infrastructure collaboration projects, contributing to infrastructure for research software development, climate science research, and Earth systems modeling, which sounds all very interesting. Peter received his PhD in particle physics for an experimental study on the LAC data. I think you have to explain this someday. He continued to the industry as an HPC support and software engineer, helping scientists to push the limits of their applications. And this role became increasingly exposed to deep learning for vision applications in biology. In 2019, he started to lead a group of AI consultants that aims to support to help scientists at Helmholtz Society to use machine learning in experiment and theory. And I think that's why you are so interested in this topic, right? Great. So I hand over to you guys.
Thank you, Oliver. I hope everybody can hear me. Now it's nice and clear. And yeah, let's just dive in. Let me get the focus of my screen. So Oliver just nicely introduced ourselves, Anne and myself, and we included a bit of a slide about ourselves for later reuse. Anne, do you want to share something else, or you want to?
No, nothing more. I think
cool.
Oliver already did. Said everything.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. So you have our Twitter and GitHub handles if you want to reach out here at the bottom, and same goes for myself. So feel free to contact us also after the workshop if you still tend to have questions. And off we go. So what's our data set? Where do we come from? Anna, your turn.
Yes. So the idea was to organize a different type of workshop, and the target audience was really more researchers, like young researcher, PhDs or postdoc and associate professor that want that have maybe some project funding and want to learn and collaborate with specialists. So that was the main idea initially. So we organized one deep learning workshop in 2019, and it was booked very quickly in 5 minutes. We organized, we had 2 days of teaching and practicals, and we chose from the beginning to follow the carpentry style approach, which is to mix teaching and exercises in between. But as we started to have this deep learning workshop, we had more requests, and we organized as follow-up what we call walk along, which is probably a bit what Heidi showed before, where we had a bit of video and interaction and bring your own data approach. So it was much shorter, with like half an hour teaching, and then 1 hour and a half or 2 hours of bring your own data and discuss on what you can do with it. It's your turn. We don't hear you, Peter.
Hang on. So now fixed. Cool. So my background at my former employer at the MPI-CBG here in Dresden. So it's a biology institute. I organized 2 deep learning boot camps. That's how we named it in 2017 and 2018. Both were 1 week in duration. Typically that meant 3.5 days of teaching. And 1 day was invested into a kind of session, bring your own data style, where we hoped that we can consultate our learners on how to bridge the gap from what we taught to what they have to do in practice. And then I also organized 1 deep learning hackathon last year. The background of the learners was typically PhD, student level, postdocs, and research group leaders from all kinds of disciplines. We had a very, very mixed background of learners, which I'll come back to in a minute. So what we thought for the main agenda or for the main plot of this talk, that we orient ourselves at this paper here, 10 Simple Rules for Running Interactive Workshops. I put the link here in the slides, which I will make available after this presentation. So the background of this +1 paper is more geared towards brainstorming style workshops, where you want to create content most of the time with your participants. But we had the idea that the 10 simple rules that are published here in this paper are actually well fitting to our endeavors as well. So for a more goal where you want to transport content or inform people. So this is how we structured this presentation. And so let's dive into the first point. So the first point was you should decide whether an interactive workshop is the right choice. Anne, up to you.
Yes, so as we based our teaching style with the carpentry approach, it was of course interactive, but the interactivity can have different forms, of course, as we'll see later. So one of the main points is we had optional exercises a lot and many discussions, so to increase the interactivity. One other important point is that we decided from the very beginning that we will co-develop the training material. And mostly because I work in a very small lab and in Norway, we don't have so many staff. So from the beginning, we try to approach the carpentries and put the lesson in the carpentry incubator to have more instructors and people who can really give feedback on the content to increase the quality. So we tried also to onboard helpers, so to grow as a community. What we found out is what's very, very hard to correctly communicate the learning objectives. Even so, we can have precise learning objective in the lesson, in the training material. Learners often read buzzwords, and especially as soon as they see AI or machine learning, this is fully booked in 1 minute, but not everyone is very interested, as we will come back later.
Yeah, for us, we always encouraged our speakers to teach interactively, which they were happy to do. But in a sense, our style of the workshops was more a potpourri of speakers, what you typically see also with other, let's say, summer schools or other projects where people try to teach introductory material to, let's say, data science and machine learning to a heterogeneous learner audience. What we had to find out is that this potpourri of speaker approach brings a lot of challenges with it. Of course, the teaching style is different from speaker to speaker. Then people use different notations and exercises. That said, this can be good. So for example, in our first workshop, we had a single speaker that delivered most of the material, like 80%, which many people liked. And this individual also was very communicative and very responsive to different kind of questions and very knowledgeable on top. And then in the second iteration, we had we had 5 or 6 speakers within a week. And this brought in quite some confusion for some learners. So the bottom line here, or the takeaway is that also agreeing with what Anne said, a single material or a single speaker is often better in these more condensed environments of teaching. So second point, choose your participants carefully.
Which of course we didn't, and it was the main issue, because the university policy is because we organize workshops for researcher, postdoc, and PhDs. It has to be open to everyone, independently of their background and independently of their learning objectives. So we had a very inhomogeneous class, and it was a bit challenging. So we found out that having some follow-up with study groups or more bring your own data was a way to invite more homogeneous learners to collaborate together, and mostly because they come and they have an objective, they know what they want to achieve. So that was one of the lessons learned for us. Next time, we want to select attendees, at least to have maybe some workshop for novices and maybe some other for intermediate level. So to make sure we don't have to deal with these very different levels. So we'll ask about what they want, what outcomes they want to have from the workshop, even if we have our own learning objectives, and what they will do with what they learn. Because many of the learners just wanted to come and learn about the word AI or the word machine learning, but they didn't really want to use or make use of what we were teaching.
Yeah, same here. First of all, it started, and this is a reiteration of what was said earlier, communicating the course content. So here, what this image is supposed to represent is that the same image is interpreted differently, or image and text is interpreted differently by different people. And this actually, we found out during coffee breaks, talking to people, and also then in the quality assurance survey that we did in the free comment field, that many people commented on, yeah, I understood the documentation of your course differently than blah, 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 blah. And this turned out to be one of the big hurdles. Some people were open and communicated honestly, hey, I just want to get to know the key words of the field, something like this, and get an overview. But then other people said, I thought I learned more about segmentation because they came more from microscopy background. Other people thought, why is this so computer vision focused? So communication is key, both in a written form and then also in a pre-workshop communications by mail. So this is something that turned out to be very helpful, that we said very early on in the workshop. If you have any questions, feel free to stick your head out and ask. So yeah. The third simple rule, identify suitable activities.
Yeah, so here I don't talk about how we design the lesson itself, but more how we try to engage with learners, because we found that one key aspect for a workshop of this kind is for us as instructor to understand what the learners wanted to get out of the workshop. So we did a lot of different games like icebreakers. We did a game where physically we were mimicking a neural network. So just for people to get an overview of what it is. And we also did like a very classical word of clouds. So it was really for us, engaging with learner was even more important than the material itself. Of course, it was a face-to-face workshop, and but many of these translate to online workshops, and it's even more important, as Heidi mentioned.
Yeah, for us, we tried to structure our course in this fashion after quite some discussions with the instructors. And this was actually the first point where we saw that a rigorous identification of learning objectives is at the heart of having a successful and good workshop for everyone involved. So we started with transfer learning because our focus was deep learning as a whole. So here we hoped that participants can run their first deep learning model on some given data within half a day, which we succeeded in. And then we elaborated on this and basically unpeeled the onion. So we started to say, okay, let's take a step back, what we just did, and opened up this onion shell and first had a look at the model, how it's structured, and terms like a loss. And then all of this was interweaved with example code and ready-made Jupyter notebooks. Back then they were still called iPad notebooks. And this actually worked well. But to be quite fair, judging from the ominous 20-20-60 rule, so that in the learners you have 20% that are ahead of the content. For 60%, the content is perfectly right, and for 20%, the content is just too hard. I can just say that we found out about this again empirically, and could see this in the quality assurance, that people still said more demos, more codes for playing around, and this was about 50% of the learners. So simple rule number 4, identify facilitators and brief them.
Yeah, so for us, we also again follow the carpentry style. So we don't teach alone. We had 2 instructors for the 2 days workshop, and we did half day each. So I was teaching in the morning, and the other instructor was teaching in the afternoon. And at the same time, we had helpers. So we had 2 helpers, and they were going around and trying to make sure everyone was on board and could get something out of the workshop. And of course, when we move online, this is even more important. And now when we do workshop online, we even have more facilitators. We have what we call a Zoom host, which only the logistic for the Zoom, creating the breakout room, for instance, answering to the chat. And we have like a shared document host or master, I don't know how you want to call it, which is who is really in charge of making sure if people have questions, it will be answered, and we can follow up on the exercises. And we have also helpers, a lot more helpers than in a face-to-face meeting. So for work along and study groups, the instructor also had the role of facilitator, because it's a much smaller group. It's much more homogeneous, so it's much easier for instance, to teach and at the same time to help. So that was the lesson learned we had so far.
Yeah, for us, facilitating meant and also to provide the hardware and access to it, which we did ourselves as well. So what we actually saw here, which doesn't come to a surprise for many potentially, is that for some cluster environments, it's hard to give out accounts for externals that are not part of the institution, which meant a little bit of a workaround. Then, of course, keep in mind that the learner crowd that is interested in machine learning has typically no HPC background, so is not used to working with a cluster, or sometimes even not used to coding as itself. I think this was mentioned by Rebecca in the morning as well. And for this, testing your demo environment and the exercises in Jupyter Notebooks is super extremely important. And of course, now that technology like Colab notebooks provided for free, as I've been told by Google, might be a way to go. But again, this needs quite some preparations, which we try to invest in quite some time. And that actually helped a lot of times, especially with the mixed backgrounds of the learners. Rule number 5, consider logistics, facilities, and how to record outcomes.
Yeah, so here we were very lucky because we are teaching in the framework of the university, and the science library was in charge of the logistics. So this is really a peace of mind for instructors, and this is also a nice way to get more instructors on board for teaching. So we delegate all the logistics to the science library, and they are really used to organize workshops. We have a few requirements. We have a Google form where we say we want to have, for instance, a cabaret setting, or what you can choose what you want, and if you want to have a category. So it's really so easy. We also have laptops from the science library, and we can have a list of software we want to have installed with the setup, which we provided. So if the learner doesn't have a proper setup, we could give them a laptop to make sure they can still follow the workshop, because we didn't have, as Peter, an online setting. So we use a standard classroom for workshops, so very classical, with tables in row. And for work along and study group, we use cabaret settings for having more collaboration and discussion, and it worked very well so far.
On this point here, I want to share the setup of the classroom, because the teaching itself is laptop or computer based, and so are the demos and little exercises that we had. So for example, here we were very lucky that the institute was just rather recently built, and here you see the setup that we used. So that, for example, here in these rows, the front rows have 2 monitors basically for each half of the classroom. And also the more backwards table rows have access to their screens on the left-hand side and right-hand side. Given that it was not always perfect, I would say, for teaching interactively. So there, to be quite fair, the Corona lockdown actually imposed quite an advantage, because then everybody at home had as much real estate on the screen for them as possible. And here in the room, you only have, quote unquote, your laptop and the screens that we provide. And still, we were super happy, and most of the learners that were not exposed to, for example, this setup before, actually gave us the feedback that this was very helpful, especially the monitors for the back rows. Oh, there's a slide missing for some reason.
I don't remember the title of that one.
Yeah. Let me dig that up real quick. There we are. So this, we just had number 5, and number 6 was plan the agenda.
Oh yeah, of course. So for planning, so we use for the lesson structure, we use a Carpentries template for lesson. So we had already a pre-made style for writing. Everything is written in Markdown, so everyone can easily contribute. And when we planned for the lesson, we started with defining learning objectives, and then we built the exercises first. So all the exercises before the lesson, and then we wrote the lesson, and then at the end we added optional exercises, because we knew in advance we would probably have different level of skills. We always in the agenda make sure we had very long breaks, and it was like coffee breaks, but it was more like informal discussion breaks, because the idea was we wanted to initiate new collaboration. We wanted researchers to network and discuss together for maybe applying for funding in the future.
Yeah, picking up on this, we followed a similar principle. So leave room for breaks, and actually that meant an extensive morning break, lunch break, with after lunch coffee, and then also an extensive afternoon break. And then also something very important, we kept strictly to 7 hours max of teaching agenda. This was actually almost the limit. I would have loved to reduce this to 6 hours, but actually a lot of our also speakers said, no, we'd rather keep it to 7 hours and increase the proportion of exercises where it's not as strict or intense concentration is required. The breaks that we had, or also sessions where not such an intense concentration was needed, is room for lightning talks where people can introduce themselves. Again, picking up of the notion of such a workshop being a place for networking. Then we also have poster discussions, which I will return to in a minute. And then we also thought that industry talks might be a good idea, but that was also something that the people, so our learners said this was not very helpful. So we thought that we could bring in also proprietary speakers that could help and demo useful tools where, for example, you can use a GUI to steer a deep learning model, but this many learners said that it wasn't really helpful for them. Simple rule number 7, market your interactive workshop as a networking opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, that was the main objective of researchers. They were coming mostly to network, and this is what we found out later. So it went quite well in that sense, because they were prepared. we did a lot of games and icebreaker at the beginning. So we did like games where you have to write your name and a few characteristics of yourself, and you have to guess, saying a few words. So we did in small groups. So people really like the fact that they can remember one thing about one person. We also did some games like what is your favorite ice cream, and you have to remember for all the different attendees, like memory games. And one of the games which worked very well was to experiment like physically as an exercise neural network. So where we had sticky notes where we were writing the weight and people were just passing, and they had lots of fun. They were laughing a lot, and it really, really helped to network afterwards, because then we had informal discussion with long breaks, and sometimes even after the workshop or before the workshop. And having this icebreaker at the very beginning of the workshop really like a big change for the entire workshop itself. So we try to do the same for online workshop, and with more or less success, because some researchers, they don't really like this online like game fashion. They find this is very childish. So we had this challenge which we haven't overcome yet. So if you have any ideas, please let me know.
For us, we try to facilitate this networking also actively. So, for example, our requirement was that every learner brings an A1 poster to explain their data and what they want to solve with machine learning. And basically, we dedicated a longer break per day. So this was typically the afternoon session. So people can also venture out of the classroom and then stand in front of their poster and discuss. And I think for one workshop, we also devised an activity where people collect tokens from each poster and then get a reward for this. So like a pen. I mean, it was really a small reward, and not everybody participated here, but at least it gave people a concrete motivation to go out and have a look at people's posters and what they want to achieve. And this also applied to the instructors, which was of course very helpful, that our learners can get direct feedback from the experts, so to speak. And then this gave the instructors also the possibility to point out space or aspects of the content that they taught that might be relevant for the concrete project that people want to solve. Yeah, and the bring your own data session, that worked very well for networking, because then, as Anne suggested earlier, then people that have similar data, for example, from microscopy or genome data, cobbled together immediately, because we organized this as a kind of like unhackathon. So people can go up to the whiteboard and tell others, okay, my data looks like this, like, I don't know, 3D optical images or something like this. And then other people could immediately see, I have similar data. So they would team up and work on this together. So simple rule number 8, get the best from your participants.
So here I put again emphasis on everything a bit outside the workshop itself, because I think this is very important. So we try to prepare our learners beforehand. So we always open the workshop half an hour before to welcome them and have a bit of discussion with them. We had a help desk before the workshop for the setup, because learners were coming with a laptop if they had any setup problems, so we could help them. And we had helpers during the workshop, so we need to facilitate, where we were using sticky notes, green and red. If they had problems, they could get a helper very quickly. So that was a way of trying to get the best from our participants. And we had, because we had very homogeneous classroom, it was clear that some learners were a lot more advanced than others. So where an exercise was done and they had finished the optional exercises, we asked them if they wanted to help others. And some really liked this approach, others didn't. So it really depends on the person.
Yeah, in our case, we used a system called Indico. That's an open source software that you can deploy on a server and then acts as a event management service. And this is how we relayed most of the information to the learners. This worked very well. And also, this also applies to the registration and the quality assurance surveys. So we were lucky enough to have this available for our institute. And through this Indigo webpage of the workshop, we also provided all important schedule changes and whatnot. We also used HackMD and Etherpads where suitable, I would say, so that people could exchange knowledge or links they found on the web that relate to the content that is just about being taught. We motivated all our helpers and teachers or instructors to wear their workshop t-shirt, which had a different color than the learners. So those people that people can ask for help are easily identified, especially in the first days of the workshop. This is super instrumental because people don't know each other yet. And of course, during the progression of the workshop, this eases out. And then this whole teacher dressing up or uniform wearing, if you want to call it like this, is not required anymore. And what we also tried to weave into the workshop is something that we picked up from the carpentries. So at the end of each morning and afternoon session, we motivated the learners to provide us sticky notes with things they learned or things they didn't learn. And this is something that we also transported over to online teaching endeavors that I've been doing ever since. So that also during the workshop, you really get a notion or you have a direct feedback loop from your learners, what is going right and what is going wrong, that you can as teacher adapt very easily and quickly. Simple rule number 9, follow up with your facilitators and create a post-workshop report.
So we mostly follow up with helpers and instructors. And the main objective was to recruit them for teaching future workshops if they were helper, or to have walk along and study group session. So with your bring your own data. So we really tried to encourage them. We had some kind of blog post on the university website to thank them. And we gave them a certificate, even to helpers, so for, of course, to instructor when they ask, but also to helpers, because most helpers were like PhD students, and they really think this is useful for them as in their own career. So this is something we acknowledge. I was not initially planning to give a certificate for helpers, but it was asked for one, and I say, okay, then I ask for everyone if they want to have it. And I think it is very helpful. It's very important to reward and to acknowledge the work they have done and the effort they have put in it.
Yeah, for our approach, as we had this, what I call the potpourri of speakers in the beginning, it's very tricky to do follow-ups because typically people return to their day job and are pretty busy. But we nevertheless try to do that because it's also very important, and many teachers, so not all of them, but many ask for this, that they can connect with other teachers and exchange experiences for themselves to improve their teaching and next time to detect deficiencies or advantages better and earlier. We also supplied certificates to learners and helpers. For the helpers, more or less, we did that on demand. And for the learners, all of them received a certificate. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we try to have post-mortem meetings and then discuss based on the quantitative feedback that we received from the workshop survey, and also, of course, from the more qualitative feedback we received during coffee breaks. And last simple rule, number 10, follow up with your participants.
So we follow up with walk-along session and study group activities, which is another like a club in university, where every Thursday we meet and we have a discussion or a short teaching, and people come with their own data. So, and it works very, it's very effective for everything related to machine learning.
For our case, what we did, so we gave out postcards, empty ones, so people can send them to their future self. meaning that they put down the address of their home institute and then add a text of their liking. So what we motivated them to do is, for example, put down really content they appreciated that they learned, or something that they struggled with before the workshop and now finally understood, or something like this. Of course, it's up to them. And what I then did, I collected all of these postcards and sent them out 6 months after the workshop. So that what we try to do with this is then have their or help their memory 6 months after the workshop to get back or draw back out of the archive some things that they really enjoyed, and then with this fortify this knowledge that has been taught. What we did was also blog posts, so that people that connect through social media can also read up on something, and we informed all of the learners by means of this Indico webpage that I mentioned earlier about this as well, which some people enjoyed. And then, of course, we highlighted a couple of aspects on social media, which, to my surprise, actually 20 to 30% of the participants used to then also stay connected and then, for example, give us feedback a week after the workshop. Hey, I returned to my institute and look at the segmentation that I now was able to run, and at least understood what the parameters of the segmentation mean, and could actually change them in an informed fashion. So this brings me to our summaries, plural, and we try to do this in one slide now.
Yeah, so for us, the lesson learned is 2-day workshops is about right for novices. So for those who don't really know about machine learning and want to have like a rough overview, it's too short for people who really want to use machine learning in their day-to-day job for their own research data. And this is why it has to be complemented with like a study group or more dedicated work with them. And another point is to make the workshop prerequisite very clear, which we haven't done, and now we have learned from it. So to make sure they know what they will get and they know what they need for the workshop. In particular, all the exercises were using Python, and obviously we were not very clear on this.
Yeah, we did 1-week workshops, as I mentioned before, as an introduction to deep learning, and found out, which was expected, that this is a very intense endeavor, depending on the depth, how you want to discuss this content. Nevertheless, the feedback was overly positive. So 80 to 90% of the learners returned us with good or excellent grades on our quality assurance survey. So people liked it, they learned a lot, and of course on Thursday or Friday, fatigue was spreading, but nevertheless, this turned out to be good. As I mentioned before, I think 3 days of teaching, or 3.5, is really maxing out things. Set the goals right, as Anne suggested earlier, and communicate them clearly. That's also something we can learn from this. And something that I wanted to put at the end of the slide is, it's a learning experience for everybody involved. Even if you repeat content, it's always something new, and you always need new characters, new composition of learners, etc. So thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Peter and Dan. Are there any questions?
Maybe I can ask a question. Oh, Carsten, go first.
Oh, well, thanks. Just a short question about bring your own data. In my experience, underestimating the pitfalls of the problem is one of the greatest problems, and in the machine learning and data science. Have you got any bad experience in that kind, or is it safe, so to say? I agree that it is important that participants get to know the problems of the others and the data structure, but I'm always a bit, maybe I miss an important part of it. Maybe you can comment on that, please.
Anne, go first if you want.
Okay, so I go further and then you compliment. I found it was extremely challenging for me because I was teaching is fairly easy in that sense, but as you said, we have to be very careful. And I only gave advice with data I knew more or less. So, for instance, I'm from the climate or geoscience department, so I was only giving support to these people. And we had other instructors and other helpers for each different topics to make sure we don't say something stupid, which is fairly easy. And we had many times people coming with one set of data, and it was clearly not suitable for machine learning. And you have to be very diplomatic because you cannot say straight away, oh my God, it will never work. Why do you even try this? If there is nothing in your data, you will get nothing, because people imagine like machine learning is like magic. And whatever the rubbish is in your data, you will get something fantastic out of it. So it's we had to go very slowly with some of them. So yeah, it's hard, but I think I learn a lot myself. And as an instructor and for teaching machine learning, I learn a lot for building new exercises for the training material. And Peter, you can complement.
Yeah, so what I found out, so I agree with Anne, we had a couple of those cases, but overall what we found out is that, so we had one day only for this bring your own data, right? And we had 35 or 30 to 35 learners as well. So it's a large crowd, but the good thing is about when they bring their own data, at least you visually can inspect it and then point people to similar open data sets where, you know, if it doesn't work, if for example, you teach classification and they can't make the code run for their data, at least you can point them to an open data set where potentially there are some demos or some example code is available online where they can go and then reiterate, right? And you can point them to the similarities between their data and this open data set. This helped a lot of people tremendously, because I agree with Anne, some people come and show you 5 images and say, I want to do deep learning on this. And you're like, don't get me wrong, but it won't be possible. But if you point them to a larger open data set and say, look, here you have 5,000 images, they're not the same, but they look the same. So you might want to experiment with this. They're super happy and they can venture out and learn the models, similar to what Rebecca said earlier. At least they have something to play with and understand how machine learning works with similar data. So that helped them a lot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can ask a question too. So you both are carpentry instructors, right? Would you recommend people first of all to become carpentry instructors, and also so you seem to be using your carpentry skills also for other courses, is that right?
Anne, go ahead.
Yes, so I mean, I'm not coming from academia initially. So when I entered academia and I was asked to teach, it was a disaster because I never had this approach of how to teach. So for me, carpentry was like a saver because I had simple rules to follow. I don't know if this is the best way to do it. I think it fits quite well for this kind of challenge we have where you have to mix teaching and exercises. It works quite well. And I like the fact that you have a framework and you can collaborate with others. And indeed, I use it a lot. I use it for every single teaching I have and not only for carpentry style. I mean, I use the carpentry style for everything. I'm sure there are better or other approaches. Just I don't know. So I was very happy to see what you were doing too. For instance, it's great.
Yeah, for myself, just adding real quick, same holds for me. I come from academia, but still didn't have any teaching background. So it's a little bit different to Anne. But the nice thing about the carpentries, they offer you a simple, lightweight training and provide you tangible rules that you can follow and, let's say, innovate or interpret on, like a musician, right, do on a score. And that's super helpful, especially with deep learning. I come to say that I wouldn't apply the carpentry style blindly. So it really depends on what you want to teach. For example, for an introductory course, it may work, but then for an advanced course where people are really in the room or online to really understand and more math trickles in, the carpentry style may not work so well. So it really depends what your learners are and what they want. So I would always try to differentiate, because what we simply saw, even for the demos that we had prepared, people still have problems coding or working with a keyboard. And for them, it's quite a mental load to work with the browser on one hand, coding there, checking their typing, watching what the instructor is commenting on the code and stuff like this. So I would really say, for me, it's the way to go, but I would try to differentiate where it makes sense, or most sense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, if there are no other questions, I guess that brings us to the end of our little preface event.